Hello everyone. Let's review the purpose of our videos. Atara and I started with the concept that we could use the Sphirot, an explanation of the Sphirot, to help focus additional attention on the plight of pregnant women who are in financial distress or emotional distress and having to make a decision that might affect terminating their pregnancy. We're at the level of Malchut, the 10th Sphira, the lowest of the Sphirot where the spirituality that God used to create the world has been turned into pure physicality. Well, pure is not the right word. That's what we're going to try to discuss. We're in a world that's physical and spiritual, and we're hoping to use this hybrid explanation to help focus the attention. Now, how does that work? Well, the universe as we know it, the Jewish universe, the Christian universe, is a duality. It consists of a spiritual component and a physical component. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose universal wisdom, it's not just for Jewish people, explained that in creating the world, God took spirituality and made it physical. But it's man's job, everybody's job, to take that physical and try to make it spiritual again. How does that help us? Now, there's another branch of Jewish philosophy. It's often referred to as Hasidic philosophy, where they say that the way to turn this physicality into spirituality again is through joy and happiness. And ultimately, the hymn that we're going to do will explain this. Now, this is a very special occasion. It's the first day of Hanukkah. It's the festival of lights, and we're going to explain how this ties in to focusing attention on the plight of at-risk babies and their pregnant mothers. We're going to try to tie it in to how we can look at the world and see spirituality in the physicality and try to turn that back into spirituality again. Let's also talk about the Sabbath. It's actually connected. The lowest Sphira, Malchut, is also the home of the Sabbath. The seventh day, there's three upper Sphirot, crown, wisdom, and understanding, and then there's seven lower Sphirot, attributes of God, if you will, kindness, justice, beauty, victory, splendor, religious splendor, foundation, which is often considered a type of purity, and ultimately the seventh, Malchut, kingdom. This is the purpose of creation. Man living in the kingdom and trying to take the physicality of the world and make it spiritual again. Now, when it comes to, and it's going to be not easy to tie all this together, but when it comes, for example, to the baby in its mother's womb, that baby has a duality too. The duality is, of course, the physicality of the baby, but it's imbued with a spiritual soul. This is something that's often missed. It's not necessary to say when the soul is. In fact, it runs all the way from conception through the very early few days of birth until the actual fetus starts forming blood. We have a tradition that the soul is in the blood. It's not important. Most of us accept that it's from conception. We discussed the tradition in a previous video that 40 days before conception, there's discussion about the soul of that individual finding its soulmate, marriage, that kind of thing. So anyway, let's also talk about one more thing that's related to this. In fact, there's a tradition that the entire Torah is God's name. What does that mean? I mean, the Torah is 600,000 letters plus or minus. What does that possibly mean that the entire Torah is God's name? That's the tradition. Maybe each person can try to figure out how it could be related. And matter of fact, one of the answers is that everything is in fact related. So for example, the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to look at the Hebrew year. Now, it happens that we're living in the year 5,781. In Hebrew, the 5,000 is truncated, and in Hebrew, the letters are also numbers. So the number of 581, 5,781, the number 781 is the equivalent of Tuf Shin Pei Aleph. This is in fact related if we have patience. And by the way, I want to, before I go on, there's that prayer that we often forget to say about thanking God for giving us His Torah. Blessed art you, Lord, God of the universe, who's given everyone his learning in the Torah. So 5,781 years since creation. It's the creation of man, of modern man, which was the purpose of the creation. So what is, the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to take the Tuf and the Shin, and they used to say that means as an acronym for Tehei Shanas. This is the year of, and in this case it's Pei Aleph. This is the year of, and he used to assign words to the Pei and the Aleph, or whatever year it was. Well, something I'd like to point out is, and this requires some poetic license, we're not going to assign a word to the Pei and the Aleph. We're going to look at the shape of the Pei and the Aleph and the number it represents. So some of you may not be aware of what a Pei looks like. Maybe you could look it up on the internet. You can Google PEH, that should bring up the shape. But if you look at it, it looks like a womb. And the Pei has a dot in the womb. Very much reminiscent of the embryo, the fetus. Almost at conception, it's a tiny dot. There's another aspect to the Pei. It's, if you know how you have an optical illusion, if you look at the Pei long enough, you're going to see three things. In Hebrew, there's a letter Chaf, okay? It has the numerical value of 20. There's on the top of the Pei, to the right, something that looks like a tooth. It's in fact an upside down Yud. Peh also means mouth. And so this has the appearance, if you look at it, you can imagine that it's a mouth. However, the Chaf is 20, the Yud is 10. So the numerical value of the components of the Pei, we've reached 30. But there's something else. If you stare at the Pei, and if you find something on the internet, you will see this if you look at it long enough. Within the pay, there's a blank space that's actually a bet, the second letter. The first letter of the Torah, Bereshis, starts with a bet. This bet is embedded in the center of the pay. And it's a duality. Bet is a duality. The spiritual and the physical component of this, whatever this pay is trying to symbolize for this particular discussion. However, if you add the numerical value of the bet to the chaf and the yud, we get 30 plus 2, which is 32. These are often referred to as the 32 paths of wisdom. They are, in fact, the equivalent of the Hebrew word lave, which means heart. And if we mentioned this once before, if you go and look at the tabernacle and who was chosen to be the supervisor, it was a man named Bezalel, and it was determined in the Torah that he was chosen because he had wisdom of the heart. Chochmas Lev. This is all related, hopefully. I'm sorry it's so long. Chochmas Lev, the wisdom of the 32. This is in fact Kabbalistic. We have 10 sfirot and 22 Hebrew letters, and the tradition is that this is what God used to create the world, the wisdom of the 32. And with various levels of understanding, with time, it becomes a little easier to understand. There's a lot of wisdom in all of this. However, we're talking about a baby, and recognizing that this baby comes from God. It's the focal point of Malchut and creation, as is the Sabbath, and we'll get to that and how this all relates. Now we have the Hanukkah menorah. This is the festival of lights. The Hanukkah menorah is in fact traditionally, Kabbalistically associated with the creation. Yes, it's a historic, it recognizes a historical event of the rededication of the Second Temple and the Maccabees' victory over the enemy, the Roman enemy, with some Greeks and Syrians thrown in as a miracle, and the temple was desecrated, but they managed to recapture it, find a vial of oil, which was only enough for one day. And in fact, part of the miracle, other than the fact that a few Maccabees were able to defeat several Roman legions, each Roman legion was 10,000 men. And how many Maccabees were there? They started out as about 400. The Maccabees were the high priest, Matisyahu, and his 5 sons. We probably most familiar with Judah Maccabee. Anyway, there was a light that God used when he created the world. Let there be light. Interesting to note that this was like said from the mouth. Let there be light, and there was light. The tradition is that first light was a spiritual light. It's not the same light we have today. That spiritual light was so profound that it's described as letting you see from one end of the world to the other, probably mentally and understanding and in a way that it's hard for us to even imagine. Later, on the 4th day, when the sun and the moon and the stars were put in their places, we have what we consider the light, the physical light that we still have today. The thing was that the spiritual light was hidden away when Adam sinned. And the rabbis ask, where was it hidden away? It doesn't say precisely. The tradition was that it was hidden away in the Hanukkah menorah. You won't find this in the Torah, but it was inferred and passed down from generation to generation that this spiritual light that was hidden away for the righteous was hidden in the Hanukkah menorah. Well, what in the world does that mean? So the holiest light in Jewish tradition is the Hanukkah menorah. One might say it should be the Shabbos candles, but it's not. In fact, you use the Shabbos candles in the home to light the dinner table, to see. You're not allowed to use the light from the Hanukkah menorah for any purpose other than to just stare at it or bask in it. And in fact, that's why they have the ninth candle. There are 8 candles, one for each night of the miracle where the oil burns. It took 8 days to send runners. They only had oil for 1 day. It burned for 8 days, but they sent runners up north. They pressed the oil, the olive oil, brought it back, and they weren't able to come back until the 8th day. And that one vial lasted 8 days. That's why it's 8 days. The shamus, the 9th candle, it's called a server candle. Yes, we light the other candles with the shamus, but really it's because we're not allowed to use the light from the 8 candles for anything else. And sometimes you use it. The light is there, you're reading. So we have a 9th candle that we say that if we're going to use any light, deliberately or by accident, it's coming from that 9th candle. You must have that 9th candle. Now, what does all this have to do with the babies? It's understanding that there's a spiritual component to everything physical in the world. God is in everything in the world. Sometimes we don't understand it. That baby has a soul that comes directly from God. Let's say it begins at conception. It's fine. No problem with that. People see that as a mass of cells, but that's not what's really there. Sometimes we need that spiritual light, like from the menorah, to help us understand what it is that we're seeing. Now let's talk about the Shabbos. The Shabbos is actually, I guess if you had to pick one holiday and one what we call mitzvah, of all the mitzvahs, the Shabbos is the most important. It's the recognition that God created the world, and it's an eternal contract between the Jewish people and God, that they will observe the Shabbos and recognize that God is their creator and God takes care of the world. What would happen is if the Jewish world didn't observe the Sabbath, and God bless all the non-Jewish Christian world that has different aspects of the Sabbath that they observe. Maybe it started out on Saturday, it moved to Sunday. Our Sabbath is on Saturday, but the principle is the same. You set aside a day and recognize the creation of the world through God. Now there's a secret about the Sabbath, and then we'll do the hymn. And the hymn is related to this special light and joy. And that's why Tara and I chose it. There's a mystical tradition, very few people know this, about how can we accelerate the coming of the Messiah. We do have this in our power. The Messiah is going to come, as we've said, when God deems that whatever or whoever it is ready. But we do have the power to hasten the coming of the Messiah. There are different ways to do that. One way, which is not well known, is so simple that one has to ask, why don't we do this? And I'll share this. Hopefully it'll be useful and serve the purpose of attracting more attention to helping save a few more babies. The secret is that if the Jewish people observes 2 Sabbaths in a row, and we're talking the entire Jewish people. Yes, there are segments that observe Sabbath, but not the whole Jewish people, because it was a contract with the whole Jewish people. The tradition is that if the Jewish people observe 2 Sabbaths in a row, God says it's time. I just leave you with that. If you have any way of participating in observing the Sabbath, you can maybe help hasten the coming of the Messiah. Now, this hymn that we're going to do kind of pulls this together. It's called Menucha V'Simcha, rest and happiness, Sabbath and joy. And light. This hymn talks about the special light of the Sabbath, helping us enjoy the physical pleasure and the spiritual pleasure of the Sabbath. So without any further ado, maybe Atara and I can do this hymn. Atara is going to first recite a translation of the hymn, and then I'm going to try to do a rendition.
Menucha v'simcha, rest and happiness, is a light to these nations. Those who guard it and observe it testify that the world's creation took place in 6 days. Many levels of heaven, the earth, the oceans, all testify by their very existence that everything was created by God and thus still exists. The deep sea creatures, the man, the wildly beasts, all testify that everything happened by God's will.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do a rendition of Menucha V'Simcha. Anybody who wants to join in and help us, we love to have you, especially the children. There's a chorus that maybe we'll make another video that's especially good for children. Menucha V'Simcha, Or LaYehudim, Yom Shabboson, Yom HaChamadim, Shomra V'Zochrav, Hema Me'idim, Ki L'Shisha Kabru'im Ve'omdim. Chorus. Shemei Shamayim Eretz V'Yamim, Kol Tzva Marom Gvohim V'Ramim, Tanin V'Yadam V'Chayas Re'emim, Ki V'ya Adonai Tzur Olamim, Hu Asher Diber Le'am Segula So, Shamor L'Kadsho Mibo Oviad Seiso, Shabbos Kodesh Yom Chemdaso, Kivo Shavas El Mikom Lachto, Shemei Shamayim Eretz V'Yamim, Kol Tzva Marom Gvohim V'Ramim, Tanin V'Yadam V'Chayas Re'emim, Ki V'ya Adonai Tzur Olamim, B'mitzvat Shabbat El Yachalitzach, Kum Kra Elav Yachish Le'amtzach, Nishmas Kol Chai V'gam Na'aritzach, Echol B'Simcha Ki Kivaratzach, Shemei Shamayim Eretz V'Yamim, Kol Tzva Marom Gvohim V'Ramim, Tanin V'Yadam V'Chayas Re'emim, Ki V'Ya'ado Shem Sur Olamim, V'Mishneh Lechem V'Kiddush Rabbah, ברוב מטעמים ורוח נדיבה, יזכו לרב טוב המשגים בה. בביאס גואל חיי עולם הבא, שמי שמיים ארץ וימים, כל צבא מרום גבוהים ורמים, תנין וידם וחייס רעימים, כי בידו שם צור עולמים. And now we're going to come back down spiritually from our learning session with the closing blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher nosan lanu Toras emes v'chayei olam nata b'sochenu. Baruch atah Adonai nosein haTorah. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us the Torah and his teachings.